Good evening. Welcome again to worship on Good Friday as we gather. I'm Deb Conrad, pastor of People's Church, and so pleased to be able to observe these holy days with you. Last night we read the beginning of the story of the last week of Jesus' life, a story this time filtered through the imagination of Walter Wangerin, who wrote the entire Bible as a novel called The Book of God. We are able to use this by permission of HarperCollins Christian Publishing, and we're appreciative of that. We left off last night with Jesus' arrest and abandonment by his friends. Tonight we will pick up there and take you through his execution and burial. This is not exactly scripture. It is storytelling, which is a faith exercise. You may hear things that don't seem quite right or that annoy you. I hope you will also hear things that pique your curiosity or give you a greater sense of the humanness of the experience Jesus and his friends were having, the things that they felt, the fear and pain and anger and guilt and grief. So as you hear the story, allow yourselves to hear the humanity of it and recognize in the course of things that we 20th century people are actually no less barbaric than our first century ancestors. Tonight, allow yourselves to enter the story. Allow yourselves to walk with Jesus. And in the walking, allow yourself to imagine the kind of disciples we are called to be and the grace of God that carries us through our days. There will be no benediction tonight when worship is done, but we hope you will join us for worship on Sunday morning as we greet the day of celebration of resurrection, welcoming new members and dedicating our new name. Whoever you are, we say every time we gather, whoever you are, wherever you are on life's journey, you are welcome at People's Church. Let us pray. God of grace and glory, you are present in the most difficult times of our lives, and we give you thanks. Tonight, remind us of your love in the midst of our dysfunctional and wounded humanity. Give us glimpses of what might be possible and pour your Spirit on us to make it so. Let us love what you love and hope as you hope. Amen. Amen. In the garden Thursday night, Judas had betrayed, and the authorities had come with swords to arrest Jesus. The disciples scattered, and Jesus was hauled away.
John. It was a hoarse, guttural whisper, unrecognizable. John, is that you? John had been hurrying through the narrow streets of the lower city. He froze and flattened himself to a wall. The night was impenetrable. John, son of Zebedee, where are you? The young man almost crouched in order to hide. Instead, he surprised himself by calling out, "Who's that? Who's there?" The whispering stopped, except for a distant clatter of running feet. The city was still as stone. John suffered a moment of panic. Then a hand grabbed his shoulder. He whirled and delivered a blow to the side of someone's head. It cracked his knuckles and he yelped. The voice said, "Relax, it's Simon." Simon just snapped. "What's the matter with you?" "Sorry," said Simon. "Sorry. Where are you going?" John, rubbing his hand, began to walk at a quick pace. Simon followed. "I know you've got some sort of plan," he said. John bent his elbows and started to trot. Simon, puffing harder, ran too. "First, you went toward Bethany like the rest," Simon said. "But then you stopped. I saw you. You turned around and came back to the city. I followed you. You knocked on someone's door. Who was that? I saw him rush out ahead of you, throwing on his robes as he went. You're going after him now, aren't you?" "Yes, Simon, and if I don't get there when he does, I miss my chance. You've already taken more time than I can spare." John broke into a steady running. "Get where?" Simon called. "What chance?" The bigger man was having trouble keeping up. "To be with him." "Him who?" "Jesus, to be with Jesus." "Jesus, where?" "The high priest's palace." "Jesus," exclaimed Simon. "That's exactly what I thought." But John said nothing now. He was running swiftly up the ancient steps to the Mount Zion. Simon, gasping for air, fell farther and farther back. On the heights of Zion, other people were hurrying through the dark streets too, all converging northeast of Esame quarter. John tempered his speed to match theirs. He didn't want to attract attention. These people were members of the Sanhedrin, summoned suddenly by Caiaphas to his palace. John knew of the meeting. It was a trial. Joseph of Arimathea had told him. He turned the corner, ran along a low wall, then stopped at the gate of the high priest's courtyard. It was shut, but there, just inside, was Joseph himself, peering anxiously into the night. As soon as he recognized John, he spoke to the maid who was holding the gate, gestured toward John, and then dashed through the courtyard to the stairs, and then to the upper level. The maid came and opened the gate to John. There was too much light in there. Officers were standing by a central fire warming themselves. Lanterns were attached to the walls around about. John felt uncomfortable. He buried his head and began to walk toward the stairs when a voice boomed, "John, John, here, out here." Simon, lathered and breathless, was standing at the gate. Quickly, John went to the maid who had admitted him and smiled. "That man is also a friend of the high priest," he said. The maid glanced back and forth between the two men, suspicious. Finally, she went and opened the gate. If Simon came in, he was on his own.
John was already mounting the steps to the chamber whose windows glowed with an interior light. Voices grew louder the closer he came. The general murmuring of many men. John did not try to enter. He crept along a stone walkway that circled the outside of the room till he was hidden from the courtyard below. Then he brought his face close to a window grill and looked inside. Men's heads blocked his vision. They were standing with their backs to the wall, but they nodded and muttered and craned to see. So John caught glimpses of the proceedings within. Jesus. A head moved, and John saw Jesus. His heart leaped. There stood Jesus, solitary in the center of the room, as calm as a candle. Though his clothes and his flesh were soiled, and the hair that hung down his back was a falling mass of knots, a voice inside said, "Testimony." Heads moved, all looking in one direction and blocking John's view. "Testimony," said the voice, dominant and self-confident. A lesser voice, further inside the room, called out, "He spat in my son's face." The head swiveled to the new speaker, and John could see Jesus again, profile, facing the front of the room, which was cut from view by the window casement. His arms were still bound behind him, but he seemed motionless by choice. His lips pursed as if forming one letter of the alphabet, one sound forever. "Spat in your son's face?" said the voice of silken authority, and Jesus was hidden again. What sort of charge is that? Uncleanliness, bodily discharge. The spit defiled my boy. Someone else called. "No, it healed your son of blindness. It got him thrown out of the synagogue too." "Not enough," declared the voice in front of the room. "This must be the high priest, Caiaphas. I want more damning testimony." There was menace in the tone. Then people began to shout out a series of accusations. "He has broken every Sabbath law, working, walking, cooking on the Sabbath." "Noted," said the high priest. "He eats with sinners." "Noted." "He scorns our father Abraham. He casts out demons by the power of demons." "He says he can forgive sins." "Noted, noted." The high priest raised his voice in procedural scorn. "We've heard all it before, and none of it warrants execution." The room was stung to silence.
The head directly in front of John bowed down, and he saw Jesus framed by the window, still erect, his beautiful forehead filled with thought. Who brings against the defendant, Caiaphas said with smooth articulation, witness concerning a capital crime, an offense deserving death? Suddenly, the head at the window snapped up, and inches from John's face called, "I do." John swallowed hard. Their nearness left him trembling. The man moved from the window into the room and stood by Jesus. "Give God the praise," the invisible judge intoned. "What have you to say?" Rubbing his chin, the witness said, "I heard the defendant announce that he was going to destroy the temple." "Good, sir. Sabotage and sacrilege are killing offenses." "Very good." "Yes," cried another man, rushing to the side of the first. "Yes. He said he'd destroy the temple made with hands and in 3 days build another without hands." "Wait," said Caiaphas. But already a third man was clapping for attention and shouting, "I heard it too, just this week." "No, no, no," the first man shouted. "No, the defendant said it 3 years ago, exactly." "Shut up." The voice of the high priest dominated the room. "Trifling witnesses. You're ruining your own testimony." The 3 men crept to the farther wall, and Jesus remained alone in the center of the room. Then Caiaphas himself appeared. John saw the high priest approaching Jesus, a wizened, insinuating man, hunched at the shoulders, moving on a soundless tread. Over clean white linen, he wore a blue woven robe whose hem was edged with bells of gold and pomegranates of cloth. On his head, he wore a grand turban. Caiaphas found a mark immediately before the slender form of the Lord and stepped on it. Then he lifted his face and parted his lips, smiling. Jesus returned the look, but did not smile. Caiaphas said, "What? Have you nothing to say in answer to these charges? You've never been afraid to speak. Go ahead." Caiaphas made a show of bowing his head to listen. "Defend yourself." But Jesus held his peace. John's heart was hammering within him, seeing these two in such proximity. Jesus had a lean, regal posture, but he was filthy, and Caiaphas was arrayed in the glory of Aaron. "You do not choose to talk?" said Caiaphas. "Then I choose, and you will have no choice but to speak." The high priest drew himself up to his full height and said, "I adjure you by the living God to tell us whether you are a Messiah, the Christ, the Son of God." Softly, Jesus said, "I am." John gasped and covered his mouth. Jesus was still speaking, "And you shall see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power, coming with the clouds of heaven." "The man is dangerous," Caiaphas muttered. Then he said, "Blasphemy." More loudly still, "Blasphemy." He seized the throat of his robe and tore the cloth apart. "What need do we have of witnesses when the man blasphemes in the very midst of the council?" Caiaphas withdrew from Jesus out of John's sight, but his insinuating voice filled the chamber. "What say you, reverend sirs? What sentence does a Nazarene deserve?" "Death." First one and then another said, "Death." Then the whole company of witnesses and counselors were condemning Jesus in a glad chorus of unity. Death. It was as if some prohibition had snapped in the room. Men surged in toward Jesus. John wound his fingers through the window grill, tormented by the scene. Men were spitting in Jesus' face and hitting him in the head. They covered his eyes and cried, "Prophecy, Christ! Who was it that hit you?" John backed from the window, sick with sorrow. He turned away. Just then he heard footsteps in the narrow road behind the high priest's house. A man was running. John looked, and in the spill of window light recognized the small form of Judas Iscariot, dashing away at a wild pace. It was the last time any disciple saw Judas. This is how Simon Peter remembered it later.
John left me alone. He disappeared. I had no idea where he went, and I had no friend in that place. He did. I didn't. And even as the servant was opening the gate, she kept staring into my face. That was unnerving enough. And then she spoke, and I glanced down at her. And that's how I lost sight of John in the courtyard. What she said was, "Aren't you one of the man's disciples?" Took my breath away. I had just gotten there. "What man?" I said. "You know," she said, "the man they arrested." "No," I said. "No, I'm not." I brushed past her, and since John was nowhere in sight, I went to the fire in the middle of the courtyard, as if I had business in that place and knew exactly where I was going. It was a common fire on a cold night. Officers of the temple guard were warming themselves, servants too. I put out my hands and ducked my head down. Jesus was somewhere in the palace. I meant to stay. But that maid wouldn't leave me alone. Soon I felt that people were looking at me, made my flesh crawl. I glanced up, and there she was, talking to the officers. "This is one of them," she said. "He's a disciple of the Nazarene." "Woman," I said, "I don't know, and I do not understand what you're talking about." But I moved to the front court, a colder place, but darker too. I loved Jesus. I loved Jesus then desperately. That whole night it was hard for me even to breathe, because I kept seeing him tied up. He was somewhere in the high priest's house with people who wanted to kill him. How could I leave? I kept wringing my hands, helpless. I wanted to throw my body at the doors and burst in and beat them all with clubs. I don't know how long I paced in that dark place. An hour, maybe. But then I tell you this part as truthfully as I can. Then 4 things happened, one right after the other. First, the shouting. All at once there came from an upper chamber the slurred shouts of many men. They were laughing as if they were drunk. I went back into the courtyard to see what was happening. But a soldier blocked my way and said, "You are one of them." I said, "No." He said, "Don't lie to me, you are a Galilean." I said, "No," and tried to push past him. But he struck my chest and said, "Don't you recognize me?" He struck me again. "I was there when you cut off my cousin's ear." "Damn you," I yelled, "damn you." People started to look, people in the courtyard, people pouring out of the upper chambers. 2 guards reached for their weapons. It drove me crazy. I raised my right hand and screamed, "I swear by the city of Jerusalem that I know nothing of this man. I do not know." And then this is the third thing that happened. Jesus came out of the upper chamber, his arms bound behind him. He turned and looked down at me. He saw my right hand in the air. And this is the 4th thing. Somewhere in the night, a rooster started to crow. I lowered my hand and covered my mouth and turned away from Jesus and ran out of the courtyard. I ran out into the city. I ran down a dark alley and fell to the ground with my face in my hands, and I burst into tears. I cried and could not stop. This is the whole truth.
Friday's dawning was uncertain. It was the end of the latter rains. Clouds had crept in from the sea and covered Jerusalem in a sky as undefined as the sea itself, a gray weight under heaven. Dawn, then, was a lessening of shadow, an odor of moisture, and a dirty light. Now and again, a thin, drizzling rain fell. The palace which Herod the Great had built more than 50 years ago was enclosed by a wall of massive stone 45 feet high. Pontius Pilate walked its promenades. His troops occupied its barracks. Rome ruled. A principal gate in the Praetorium Wall opened eastward to the wide public square of the upper city. Guards stood in the towers on either side of the gate, though in these days they did not shut its huge doors. Jews who intended to celebrate the Passover would never defile themselves by entering the residence of a Gentile. But Roman law required prosecutions and sentencing to take place in public. In order to render legal judgments, then, Pilate met with the people of Judea in that square east of the royal palace. A dais had been erected in that place. When court was in session, a large wooden chair was brought out and set upon this platform, the magistrate's seat. When Pontius Pilate sat therein, he was Rome. In the dirty dawn of Friday, High Priest Caiaphas stood at the very edge of the ramp that led to the Praetorium Gate and rapped the hard end of his staff on the flagstones. An audience and a judgment, he called. Behind him, a miserable group had gathered in the public square, soldiers of the temple guard, certain leading members of the Sanhedrin, and in their midst, his wrist bound in front of him, his face soiled and tired, but otherwise unremarkable, Jesus of Nazareth. Pontius Pilate, procurator, the high priest called, clearly but loudly, not obsequiously. Here is a criminal of such public threat that Rome must hear the indictment and pass sentence and execute her sentence now, today, before sunset and the Sabbath. Having made his formal petition, the high priest returned to those who stood under the gray drizzle in the open square. Other members of the Sanhedrin showed more anxiety than he did, murmuring among themselves about the charges they would bring. Jesus allowed his eyes to wander over the spacious pavement. He focused on the far southeastern corner. His lips tightened and his jaw clenched. Several women and a man were lurking in that corner, their hoods drawn up against the weather. Their faces were mostly concealed, but he recognized them. Andrew, his first follower. He must have brought the women here. Mary Magdalene, pinched and pale. Joanna and Susanna, and Mary of Bethany, and her sister Martha, short and solid. Jesus closed his eyes in unutterable sadness. Suddenly, 2 Roman soldiers thrust a wooden shaft between his elbows and his back. They each took an end and drove him forward to the front steps of the platform. Pilate's chair was in position. Pontius Pilate himself was ascending steps at the back of the platform. The judged and the accused arrived at the same time.
A servant raised a shield over Pilate's chair to protect him from the rain. "Now then," said Pilate, sitting down and beckoning the high priest forward, "what's the charge?" The Roman wore his hair cut short. His knuckles were dimpled, his fingers fat, his upper lip low in the middle and high at the sides, as if it were deformed by too much blowing of trumpets. It gave him an expression of perpetual sneering. Caiaphas said, "We found this man, Jesus of Nazareth, perverting our nation." "Yes," Pilate said. And Caiaphas, "sedition. He says that he is Messiah, a king." Pilate frowned. "Why have you come to me?" he said. "Your Messiah is your religion. Judge him according to your own law." The governor made motions to stand and go. Caiaphas snapped to attention. "No, we must come to you," he said. "We don't have the authority to put a man to death." Pilate did stand up then. "Death?" he said. "You think he's committed a capital offense?" He stepped forward and squinted into Jesus' face, then said, "Bring him in. I'll interrogate him inside." By the rod at his back, the soldiers dragged Jesus after the governor through the gate into the praetorium itself. In a broad hallway, Pilate again sat down. Jesus was positioned directly in front of him. There was a bowl of fruit at Pilate's left hand. "I have no time for this," he said. "Make your answer short. Jesus of Nazareth, are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus bent forward by rod through the crooks of his arms and elbows. Nevertheless, he raised his head and looked into Pilate's eyes. "Do you say this on your own," he said, "or did others tell you this about me?" "What, am I a Jew?" Pilate sneered. "Your own chief priest delivered you to me. What have you done?" Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my subjects would be fighting for me. But my kingdom does not belong here at all." "So," Pilate said, "then you are a king?" "You say that I am king. The reason I was born into this world is to testify to the truth. All those who belong to the truth listen to my voice." "Truth," Pilate said abruptly, half out of his chair. "What is truth?" Shaking his head, he walked out into the wet morning while the accused was driven stumbling behind him. This time Jesus was forced to climb the steps to the dais. As he came to the top, he saw Pilate's back and heard the confident announcement, "I find no fault in this man."
A clamor arose in the public square. Crowds were gathering now. Certain members of the Sanhedrin came forward, lodging further charges against Jesus. He stirs the people to insurrection, even from Galilee to this place. Pilate glanced towards Jesus. "Permission to speak." Jesus said nothing. "He's a known revolutionary." Pilate nodded, but Jesus said nothing. "He has forbidden his followers to give tribute to Caesar." Each time an accusation was presented, Pilate invited some reply from Jesus, but he held his peace. He pursed his lips. He looked every accuser squarely in the face, but he himself said nothing. Finally, Pilate raised his hand for silence. He stepped forward on the platform, prepared to render his ruling. "I examined this man and found no evidence for any of your charges," he said. "But your outrage is real, and it must be satisfied. Therefore, I will order the accused to be scourged with a whip of knotted cords and weights of metal, the flagellum. After that, I propose to honor your custom of releasing one prisoner at the Passover. I will release this man, Jesus of Nazareth." There was a moment of perfect stillness. The high priest looked trapped, unable to respond. Suddenly, a voice cried from the back of the crowd, "Jesus? Jesus who?" It was a woman perhaps 50 years old. She began to push her way forward, crying, Jesus of Nazareth? Not Jesus of Nazareth. She was clothed modestly like a rabbi's wife. Though her robes were drenched and her progress was broken by the weight. Jesus watched her coming. So did Pontius Pilate and Caiaphas, the high priest. The woman's features were hectic with fear and a wild hoping. No, she was calling, not Jesus of Nazareth, but Jesus Barabbas, my son. My son, set my son free. Jesus recognized the rage of maternal love in this woman, and he admired her. Caiaphas seemed to catch fire as she came nearer. He reached for her, took her elbow, escorted her to the very lip of the platform, and trembling with compassion, cried to Pilate, "Yes, this woman's son. If you choose to honor the custom, sir, release unto us Jesus Barabbas." A handful of zealots clapped their hands and yelled, "Barabbas, Barabbas." The governor was stunned. "This man is a murderer," he said. "You yourself asked for his arrest." And I agreed. Caiaphas said, "I know which is more dangerous to both of us." Pilate snapped. "Only one of them has killed a Roman." But Caiaphas and the chief priests were already encouraging the crowds, common folk of common loyalties, who drowned Pilate's words with their chanting, "Barabbas, release unto us Barabbas." This grew to a thunder in the square. People came rushing from everywhere in the city. More and more voices took up the chanting. The crowd was swelling into a mob. "Barabbas, Barabbas." Only those on the dais could hear the governor issue orders to a centurion. "Take him to the barracks, whip him, and make it bloody, man."
Four soldiers grabbed Jesus and dragged him back through the Praetorium gate. There was no care in their going, haste, brutality. The multitude was achieving that swollen, rocking rhythm which every Roman feared, because riot was at the heart of it. Make it bloody, man. In the barracks, soldiers stripped the clothes from Jesus' body. His hands were tied to a post with thongs. Out of nowhere, a lash whistled, stung his shoulders with little pinchings, then ripped backward and set his flesh on fire. Again the whistle and the lash, and the nettle stings, again an audible tearing of his skin. Then he heard someone cry out in sympathy. The whistle, and Jesus couldn't help it. He flinched. The whistle. He drew one knee up to his stomach. The whistle, and Jesus realized who was crying out. The whistle. It was himself. The whistle, the whistle. Jesus began to taste blood in his breathing, in his mouth and nose. He stopped making noises. Darkness closed around the edges of his thought. The whistle. He sagged. He hung heavy from his wrists. The whistle. As though from far away, Jesus watched several soldiers place on a man's brow a circlet of thorny briars. Next, they threw over his back a billowing purple robe, as huge as the sky. "Hail, King of the Jews! Ha! Hail, robed in blood, thou bloody king!" But then Jesus himself was on his feet, walking. Under rough fibers, his skin was sticky and wet. A thick liquid was running down his legs. The soles of his feet kept slipping in it. His back was unbendable. Jesus knew that it would hurt soon. Then he was standing on one side of the dais, confronting the multitude. Pontius Pilate was gesturing toward him and shouting, "Behold, the man." On the other side of the dais now stood another man, athletic, dark-eyed, fiery, and very clean. How neatly combed was he. Jesus strove to stand erect, but failed. His robe was woven of iron and stone. Pilate shouted, "Now, what do you say? Which man should I release to you, Jesus Barabbas or Jesus of Nazareth?" The multitude had found a single voice. "Barabbas!" it bellowed. Pilate looked troubled. "Then what shall I do with this man?" he cried. "Crucify him!" came the thick-throated chorus, priests and people and zealots and pilgrims, but no distinction among them now. They were the mindless mob. "Crucify him!" Jesus lifted his eyes and looked to the southeast corner of the square where he had seen some of his followers in the dirty dawning. Suddenly he gasped and nearly collapsed. "Why should I crucify him?" Pilate was crying. "What evil has he done?" Caiaphas leaped to the platform and shouted at the top of his lungs, "We have a law, and by that law he ought to die, because he made himself the Son of God." Jesus had spied his mother. She was clinging to John. Woman of no means. Woman who had borne him. Woman whose clothing was dark with the morning rain. She was staring at him with horror, her mouth wide open. Pilate was shouting at Jesus, "What's the matter with you, man? Have you nothing at all to say?" Caiaphas too was shouting, "Crucify him, magistrate, or else you are no friend of Caesar's, because he pretends to be a king like Caesar." "Crucify him!" The huge crush of people was wheeling toward riot. "Crucify him!" "What then?" shrieked Pontius Pilate. "Shall I crucify your king?" The high priest turned purple with fury. "We have no king but Caesar." And the voice of the multitude resolved itself in an endless, ponderous, roaring, "Crucify." So Pilate sank down into the judgment chair and gripped the armrest and delivered his verdict. He released the man that had been arrested for insurrection and for murder. But Jesus of Nazareth, he turned over to the will of the people. He ordered a centurion and a small contingent of soldiers to lead him outside the city and to crucify him.
Jesus is dragging a heavy wooden beam up the center of the street. In fact, two soldiers tried to lay it on his shoulders, but the weight of the rough wood started the lacerations in his back, and the pain became so intense that something like light exploded in Jesus' skull, and he slipped to the ground in a faint. So now he is cradling one end of the beam under his left arm and bumping its other end over the stones of the street. Each stone is a Sinai. There are spike holes near the extremities of the beam. It has been used before. Jesus is moving north, slowly toward the garden gate. He is wearing his own robe again and his tunic. though they have lost their shape, scabrous, befouled by human discharge. His hair, because he bends so far forward, hangs nearly to the ground. The sandaled feet of a centurion are walking in front of him just within his vision. He is following these feet. There is the sound of wailing behind him. He has heard such lamentation before, sometimes genuine, sometimes conventional, for Lazarus, for Jairus' daughter, for the son of the widow in Nain. The beam sticks between two stones. Jesus groans and drops to his knees, and the lumber hits the ground. He doesn't blame the crossbeam to which he will be nailed. He just can't carry it anymore. Motion makes his skin scream, and beneath all, his bones are weak and tired. Someone is parting his hair and drawing it back from his forehead. He is able to see. An elderly woman, her eyes swimming in tears, wipes his brow with a linen cloth and then presses it into his hand. And the centurion seems kindly enough, middle-aged, gruff. He has spoken to the soldiers, who even now are replacing the wooden beam on the back of another man. Jesus is overcome with gratitude. His chest heaves with weeping. He rises and finds his body very light. He walks forward. Immediately, the procession lifts its voice again in lamentation.
The morning drizzle has turned to rain. Everyone is wet. The sky is more than merely gray now. Darker clouds are rolling in from the west. There is a breeze. It's 9 o'clock in the morning, Friday. Out through the garden gate they go, and yet farther north. The stone city wall runs north and south on his right-hand side. Jewish tombs are cut into the rock on his left. Here is a hillock by the side of the road, a rocky mound in which 4 stout poles are fixed, forever ready to receive the crossbeams and the bodies of criminals sentenced to crucifixion. The hill allows a public viewing. It is called Golgotha. The centurion halts here and hands Jesus a jar of liquid. He lifts it to his lips and tastes it. This is wine mixed with myrrh, a narcotic. He refuses to drink it. 4 soldiers strip Jesus down to his loincloth. At the same time, another group of soldiers arrives. They bring 2 more men with crossbeams on their backs. These men do drink. They drain their jars completely dry. All 3 are now stretched on the ground, each beside a different pole. Jesus stares at the black clouds lowering. His back is a field of fire. He cannot swallow. He wishes he could swallow, but his tongue is thick and stuck to the roof of his mouth. Someone lifts his head by the hair, then pillows it on the wood. His arms are yanked left and right as far as they will go, palms up. A cold point touches his wrist. Jesus hears the thump of a maul on metal, once, twice. He feels a spike probing the bones in his right arm. Once, twice, 3 times. As the bones separate and the spike hits hard wood, a dull pain pulses up into his armpit and his neck. His left arm, likewise, is nailed to the crossbeam. Then, by pikes and human strength, Jesus is lifted bodily from the ground. Soldiers climb ladders behind the stout pole, hauling him up and allowing him to swing from his arms alone until the beam is lashed to the pole and the cross is formed. The soldiers descend. In front of him, they bend his knees and drive a 3rd spike through his ankles. His muscles convulse. He begins to tremble as if he were very cold. His teeth chatter. He bites his tongue, but doesn't notice, except that there is the taste of blood in his mouth. Abba. Jesus speaks through bloody foam and through shivering, even while one of the Roman soldiers climbs a pole behind him. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. That soldier hangs a shingle at the very top of the cross. Printed on it in Hebrew and Greek and Latin by order of Pilate himself is the legend, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews.
Now the troops responsible for these crucifixions settle on the ground and begin to divide the criminals' clothes among themselves. They cast lots for the various pieces. Rain falls steadily now, and the breeze is stiffening. Nevertheless, pilgrims still travel up the road and into the city. They see the inscription above him and grin. Certain Pharisees are standing by, nudging one another. He saved others, they laugh. What do you think? Can he save himself? Ha ha! Derision is common at crucifixions. It takes a man so long to die. Citizens participate. But Jesus' shoulders are pulling apart. He can scarcely hear human voices over the shrieking of his own pain. If you are the Son of God, prove it by setting yourself free. Hey, King of the Jews, jump down from that cross, and we will believe in you. The criminal hanging to his left is laughing. Messiah, Messiah, the man is gasping in genuine laughter. Ha ha, now I meet Messiah. Been waiting all my life, ha ha. Been waiting since the days of Daniel, hee hee. And look, he shows up dying. Well, Messiah, he hisses at Jesus, save yourself and save me too. How can you say that? The other criminal is not laughing. Don't you fear God? We are justly condemned, but this man has done nothing wrong. Jesus, he whispers. Jesus, roused by the devotion in the utterance, lifts his head and looks. The man's tendons are cracking through his neck and shoulders. Jesus of Nazareth, you healed my mother of bleeding, the criminal whispers. Doctors nearly destroyed her. I hated them. I hated everyone in authority. But you said that her faith had saved her. Now I am touching you, Jesus, as she did. I'm begging you to remember me when you come into your kingdom. The poor child, frightened of dying, casting his life to the one crucified beside him. Jesus struggles for breath and answers, truly today you will be with me in paradise. All at once the wind dies. Black clouds close like fists in heaven. Even the beasts are silent, and travelers hurry toward the city now. A storm is coming. Jesus drops his eyes, sees familiar women at his feet, and involuntarily cries out, this is the sorrow. This is the suffering greater than whips and spikes and a universe of derision. His mother is there, Mary, still supporting herself by gripping John's arm, is looking directly at him, pleading with him. Her face is at the level of his waist. She is crying. She is 50 years old, gray and frail, and her eyes are begging him, why? Why are you dying? Jesus wants to howl his grief to the black skies. He cannot touch his mother anymore. He cannot receive her love anymore. Oh God, in his condition, he is not worthy of the love of anyone. Woman, 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 he murmurs to his mother. He rolls his head toward John. He is your son now. To John he whispers, and she is your mother. Please take her away, care for her. He shuts his eyes. He is occupied by elemental things, life and death. His body hangs heavily from the extended arms and the metal spikes at each end of them. Whenever he moves, his bones make grinding sounds, and the pain descends into his pelvis, and he loses control of all his physical functions. He groans in human filthiness. Jesus opens his eyes again. His mother and John are gone.
The day is dark with a thick darkness. Thunder rumbles deep in heaven. There is a pause of eerie calm. Then lightning forks the belly of the clouds. The crash follows immediately, and all at once the wind is shrieking down the Jewish tombs. Trees bow and rise again, the leaves torn forward like women's hair. The road to Jerusalem clears swiftly of people. The soldiers huddle on the lee side of the hill. It is noon. And now, when the flashes of lightning themselves are extinguished, the earth is utterly black. Darkness an hour. While the fierce wind makes the rain sting like sand on the skin, and no one exists at all. No one exists in all the world but Jesus and his wretched body. If he should call out, who would hear? The wind pulls and snaps his hair like a banner. All his wounds have tongues. They are screaming in pitches higher than hearing. Darkness another hour. Darkness coiled and thick, itself a power entolling him, binding his chest and his heart and his mind. Jesus can neither think nor breathe. He is sunk far, far down in the great engulfing flood of the dead, the deeps that boil beneath creation. He has been swallowed by chaos. This is the place. It is here that he is dying. Darkness, the third hour. And now he knows obliteration. Jesus has been blotted out of the book of life. Not even God is here. Eli? No, not even the God who has loved him from the beginning, whom he has loved, the one whom he has called Abba. Eli? Eli? Where is his father now? Has the son become so foul that even God cannot look upon him? It is Jesus of Nazareth who howls out of hell. None but him. He can hear the words. They are his own words. He howls them up to heaven. My God, he shrieks. My God, why have you forsaken me? Silence. The universe is silenced by that cry. Jesus throws his body outward from the cross. His ribs splay apart in the straining. His soldiers form hollows at the pits of his neck. His mouth is an empty canyon. Someone says, was he calling Elijah? I don't know, says someone else. Wait and see. A third person is running through the darkness toward the crosses. Jesus allows his body to droop. The weight of it draws out his arms, closing the cage around his lungs, constricting his breathing. He can breathe only in faint pants, but he whispers, I'm thirsty. Yes, yes, cries the person who has been running toward him. Yes, drink this. On a long stalk, this most civil individual raises a sponge to Jesus' lips. He sucks and tastes the common wine. He drinks. Jesus has never drunk so sweet a drink in all his life before. The rain has ended. The wind has died. A little light sifts down like flour from the clouds. It is finished, Jesus gasped. Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. His body falls far forward. His head sinks down between the wings of his rising arms. His heavy black hair, his long wet hair falls over his head like a curtain. An everlasting sigh issues from his open mouth. And that is the end. He dies.
About 5 o'clock in the afternoon, Pilate called for the centurion named Longinus. He asked whether Jesus of Nazareth were truly dead already. There's a fellow here who wants the body, a member of their Sanhedrin, Joseph. He wants to bury him in his own tomb. You are sure then he is dead? My Lord, we went to break the legs of the criminals to hasten their dying, but Jesus was already dead. A soldier proved it by piercing his side with a spear. The blood that flowed out was mingled with water. Pontius Pilate waved a fat hand in front of his face. I will never understand this people, never. Go tell that fellow Joseph he has my permission. He's waiting in the shadows of the gate. Go. Joseph of Arimathea and Longinus returned to Golgotha together.
Joseph, a man well-groomed and richly dressed, knelt down on the earth and unrolled a linen cloth. It was an expansive piece, close woven and white. Then he leaned a ladder against the back of Jesus' cross. He took a rope and an iron claw and climbed up behind the body, which still hung from its arms, away from the pole. Joseph looped the rope around the chest of the dead. Then, pulling the ends back under the armpits and over the crossbeam, he tossed them down to Longinus. With sudden, violent wrenches of the claw, Joseph yanked the spike from Jesus' left wrist. The body swung out and hung from the right arm. Longinus tightened the rope, taking Jesus up somewhat. Joseph applied himself to the right spike. It whimpered in the wood, and Jesus slumped altogether forward into the loop of rope. Longinus felt the weight in both ends of the rope. Hold him, sir, Joseph whispered. Hold him. He scurried down the ladder and stood below the slouching corpse, under the face and the black rain of the dead man's hair. He put the claw to the spike through Jesus' ankles. Longinus heard that he was weeping when he pulled that spike. Even as Joseph spread his arms to catch the corpse, he glanced to the centurion and whispered, "Now," and Longinus paid the rope out, and Jesus came down into Joseph's arms, one at the bend of the knees and one around his shoulders. The head fell over Joseph's left arm. The mouth opened up under Joseph's close gazing, and Longinus saw a holy yearning in his eyes. Joseph of Arimathea was holding his whole treasure in all the world, this world, and the next one too. He lay his Lord upon the white shroud. He wound the linen around him. And here came the women again. They knelt like flowers around Joseph's tender wrapping. They each touched the broad, bloodless forehead of the dead man before it, too, was covered in cloth. Then they watched as Joseph took the shoulders and Longinus took the feet, and together they bore the body to Joseph's tomb, carved in rock with others of the Jews. Joseph knelt down and backed in. Longinus knelt and went forward. They lifted the body to a low ledge cut in stone on the right. They came out again and rolled a wheel-sized stone down a groove that had been etched just outside the sepulchre until the heavy stone covered the door. So, then, it was done. Jesus of Nazareth was buried.